Welcome. Welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jonathan Uresco. I'm an implementation engineer, and we have Dan Mintz, who's a professional services engineer. And we're going to be talking about the entire process and how to ease into upgrading your Macs and keeping everything as up to date as you would like. To do so, we're going to run through our agenda. So we're going to talk about in-place macOS upgrades. That's going to be if you currently have a deployed machine out there, you're looking to upgrade it, how we can erase and install remotely. We're going to provision our Macs from afar. That's going to kind of be like putting it all together, and we're going to do a full, almost like an iOS experience on a Mac, doing it, pushing out and erase, and then going ahead and provisioning it all at the same time without touching that Mac. And then if we have time, we'll get the Q&A at the end. But first, let's talk about those in-place Macs, and we'll pass it over to Dan.
Thank you. So I am going to begin the way that I do with every customer, and I'm going to say that just because we're telling you to do something the way we're telling you, it's not necessarily the only way. You know, just because we say something, you could probably find 10 different methods of doing it. So we're going to start off with the in-place upgrades. How? Well, for anyone that's not familiar with the in-place upgrades, you know, within the installer, so in this case Mojave, there's a function called StartOS install, and through there you can use different actions on that, and you can perform upgrades, in-place upgrades, where you don't have to erase the machine and start again. And you see here that this would be the command that's run if you were to just run this on its own to perform an upgrade. Now we're going to focus for this and a little bit for the later erase and install on a script that's written by a colleague of ours. His name's Josh Roskos, and he is a systems engineer at Jamf. And you can see here the link at the bottom to his GitHub, which is also linked, I think it's on our Jamf Professional Services, isn't it? Yeah. So we're going to focus on that, because it really is a great script, and we're going to look at the preparation for it. So the first thing that I guess we're going to want to do is start off and look at how we actually identify machines that are going to be needing upgrades. So I look at this from two different points of view. You've got to figure out the models of the machine that are going to not be suitable for upgrade, and which operating system are they running. Now, this here, the picture you're seeing on screen, it's a nested smart group. So the first one is a group that shows us all those models that are not eligible. And the way that one is constructed is actually based on a smart group that's created by API, and it is available at that link there. It's a blog by Rich Trounton. It's an XML that you can download and you upload by the API, and it saves you having to go ahead and make that smart group that has something like 34 different models in there. So you can go ahead and make that real quick. So the smart group is made up of people who are not members of that, and their operating system is, like 10.10, 10.11, 10.12, 10.13, whatever it may be. So you want to identify the machines. And I just want to point out at this point that you have to do a lot more prep in terms of, do my machines have apps that are not compatible with Mojave, for example? Do I need to find out, do they have enough disk space? That sort of thing. If we had like 2 hours, we could go through every finite detail of what you need to plan out. But this is just a kind of an overview. So we establish the machines that are suitable. Next up, we have to get the Mojave installer onto the machines. Now, you may find, and I've seen this in some environments, that the users have downloaded it from the App Store, but maybe never done anything with it. So you may already have some people that have the installer on there. The other option then is that you package it up for them. And you package it up, very simple, Composer, drag and drop. But you have to pay attention to this one thing, and I hope you can see it on the screens clearly. You get a warning when you're building out the package. If you're choosing DMG, what file system do you want it in? So you have to almost think, am I going to be going for machines that are not APFS because they've maybe, I don't know, regular hard drives or whatever? And you wouldn't want to build a DMG out in APFS because you'd have failed upgrades. The installer would never make it. So just to bear that in mind, that prompt has been in there since, I believe, Composer 10.4. So you build out the package, and you get that uploaded to Jamf Pro. You then go ahead and make your policy to get that silently cached, although technically we're not using the cache function. You'd just be going ahead and installing. I mean, that's bad wording on my part. But it should just be a normal install action like you're running any package in a policy. And that can just sit there and be ready. The benefit of doing this ahead of time, because the eventual upgrade example that we're going to use is that it runs from self-service. If you have it ahead of time, that's brilliant. The user runs the upgrade and it just happens. They're not left waiting for the package to download. So we've got the package ready. The next thing we need to do is just get that script ready. And there's a lot of content in the script, but these are just some of the basics in there. So you can see, hopefully, that there is some variables to go ahead there. So you've got the main ones, $4, $5, and $6. $4 and $5 you would be setting in your policy, which is the location that the installer is at. And $5, we're going to be going ahead and saying the example, the version that we're going to be going for. $6 is an option, so you can have this script call a custom trigger that will download the Mojave installer straight away. But it may just be, I think, a better user experience if you had it there on the machine, ready to go. So you copy the script in, you set your variables. You can see here the policy being run. These are the examples with the custom trigger, the version, and the location. And by the way, the script on the Professional Services GitHub, there's a whole documentation of how to prepare it. And these slides will obviously be available afterwards as well. So everything's ready. And we have this sort of user experience through self-service. And you can run this without self-service. You could just do this as a policy scheduled overnight. But we see here, you run it through self-service. And you get this, the Jamf helper. And the user sees this. Now, I would say this, that text that you see there is the default. I don't think anyone's ever going to get an upgrade happen in 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah. You never know, but you really want to set expectations a little bit better. I just left it as default. And it runs. The user, if they're watching, maybe they've gone away for lunch, I don't know, they see the sort of time progressing through. And they're finished, and they get back to the login window. All's good, they're upgraded. Now, there are obviously other factors that you may want to consider. File vault. You don't have to necessarily worry, is the machine on power? Because the script actually does a check, and it will cancel out if it's not running on power, if it's a laptop. So that's your upgrade process. Nothing's really changed from the High Sierra. If you've performed a High Sierra upgrade before, it's pretty much the same concept. So the main focus now for this presentation that I want to look at is the Erase install. So this is kind of like Jonathan was sort of alluding to. It's a little bit like taking an iPad or an iPhone, if you've not seen this or used it, and hitting Erase all content and settings. Erase install is an extra option within the installer app. Came in 10.13.4. And it does have a few caveats. You have to be running on APFS. You have to, if you're going to be doing an Erase install of Mojave 10.14, the installer being used has to be 10.14, and the machine running that Erase install also has to be 10.14. So all the versions have to match up. So this, again, would be the basic sort of component of any process that you're running. Now, enrolling remotely. Now, I'm based out of London, and we cover the EMEA markets. Now, here in the US, pretty much everyone has DEP. There are still some territories that we work with that don't have it. And once the machine has been erased and is back to factory fresh, if you have DEP, great. It's going to re-enroll itself, build itself, everything's cool. If you don't have that, then you have that challenge of how do I get the machine back under management? So that's where Apple very kindly put in an install package flag, whereby if you have a package of whatever you want on the machine at the time of running this command, it will install that and run that as part of the Erase install. So in this case, we would be using a quick add package, a modified quick add package that has a few extra components to get the machine reinstalled, re-enrolled. Now, I worked with a customer who said, the IT admin there said, I would really like it if I could go to self-service and re-provision a machine for an end user and have all the information in the JSS for the next employee, if it was to be a swap of machine, and have all the apps ready for their role. So it was all done in one go through self-service. And we talked about it, and we put together this small utility with obviously the end goal, like I've just said, to allow the admin to assign the machine and have it ready. And the example that we're going to look at was the same one. It was not a DEP machine. It was in a territory that just didn't have DEP. And the end product looks something like this. And it's triggered through self-service. Now, I don't know if everyone here is aware of it or anyone has used this before, most probably, but it's constructed using something called Pashua, which is a framework which allows you to make dialogues, very useful to run within script. So this is what it's made of. And what you're seeing here is the first step to get this going. And again, this is going to be posted on our GitHub. And again, it's fully documented. This is me packaging up Pashua because it has to be present on the machine for the script to function. So you have the app, and you have Pashua.sh, which is a function script. So all the drop-down menus and text boxes and buttons that you see within the GUI are all part of that Pashua.sh. So we have that, and we package that up. Then a little bit about how it works. And the way it works is that you add functions into the script. So for example, the message that you see here, and hopefully you can see that. Maybe it should have been a little bit bigger, the text there. But the code, that's what you'll be putting in, this block of text at the bottom. And that will dictate the position where it is on the dialogue, the size of it, what's in there. So you keep adding things like that, and there's lots of different elements that go into the script. And the user runs through this dialog box. So the dialog has entries for full name, email, short name, department, a drop-down so they can choose the configuration that they want the machine to be sort of present afterwards. And at the end of it, you hit OK, and you're left with all these variables. So you've got the TB, TF would be a text field, pop for the pop-up menu, and then you can use these in a script. So the how we get that information back up to the JSS is through a mixture of using the recon function and some API to populate the extension attributes. So you're left with all these variables. And then I want to just explain to you a little bit about the quick add package, because I said we needed to modify that quick add package. So you make a quick add package in Recon, and you then drag it back into Composer and convert to source, and then you can add bits and pieces in there. So the first thing is something to get the machine to connect to the network, because you've erased it, but you also want it during that process, when it starts to re-enroll, to have some connectivity back to talk into Jamf Cloud or your on-premise server. So in this case, I added a line at the top of the script to connect to a wireless network. Again, you could omit this if you knew that your machines were going to be desktop machines on Ethernet. We then add a line a little bit further down that makes us a user account. Maybe the provisioning workflow that you have when enrollment complete hits requires a user account to be present. So we add that in there. You can tidy this up afterwards and delete this out if you want to. And then we have some more sort of blocks of code a little bit further down that return the machine back to the setup assistant, because we've got that new user account on there. But we want, in this example, we are getting the user to have a local account. So we need to return back to the setup assistant so they can follow it through and have that experience. If you're binding to the domain in your workflow, you probably don't need this section. And another piece of prep that we have to do is we need to configure our script that's going to perform the erase and install. Now again, we're actually going to go back to the same script that does the upgrade, so it's quite nice. You have one script in your environment that you can just sort of switch to do the upgrade. So parameter 8 in that script would be to mark it for erase and install. So if you were to set it, if you set it to 1, then that's going to enable the erase and install. or you leave it, you get an upgrade. So you add that in, and you make a policy that runs the utility that we wrote, so the first script. The user runs it, and they fill out the information, whatever it may be, the department, all the email, everything, and they hit OK. At this point, they see the first thing, which is the same Jamf helper, telling them that the information is being updated and sent up to the JSS. Now, at this point, like I said, a lot of it is done by recon, some of it's done by the API. And all that happens, and when that's ready, it runs a custom trigger, which goes ahead and downloads the custom quick add package. So there's another policy there that's going to bring that quick add package down and puts it in place so that it's there. It does that, verifies that's there, then it goes ahead and calls another policy that runs the script that kicks off the erase and install. So we come out of that Jamf helper and back in almost straight away to the same one. You can customize the text, put whatever you want. Again, the time, looking at the erase and install, depending on what your build configuration is at the end, maybe 25 minutes, 30 minutes. The more up-to-date Macs, the touch bar Macs, a little bit quicker. It really does depend, but when I timed it, it was about 25 minutes. Goes ahead, runs that, reboots. Installing is showing us that the erase is happening. And this is the bit here, which will change. Installing one of one. Now, when I looked at this, what that is it's running that quick add package. And it sits at that installing, going the whole way through, doing the recon, and then it installs whatever packages. Now, I had just a basic build. There was Office in there, some browsers, media players. When that bar advances through and finishes, the quick add package is finished, and all the enrollment complete is finished. And then it reboots, and you're left with the machine back at the setup assistant, and the machine has been re-provisioned. Then on to John, who's going to show you another example, which is pretty much the same, I think, but just without the GUI at the beginning.
It's the same, but
Yeah.
different.
But different, yeah.
But the same.
One's American, one's British.
That's exactly right. Now, who in the room has used this binary before to either erase a computer or fully erase and install? Okay, cool. So not very many, which is awesome, because this whole process can seem daunting to set up, and it took 18 minutes to explain. It takes way less to actually set it up. The two scripts that Dan was talking about that you can upload, you can find from our Jamf Pro Services GitHub, along with Josh Roscos's, and I guess it was Rich Trouton's instruction on how to actually set up those smart groups. All of that takes no time at all to set up. Now, there's definitely going to be some internal arguments at your organizations as to when you can update and when security says now is a good time to upgrade your computers. But you can have this in place and test it, so when that time comes, you just flick the switch and turn on and enable those policies either via self-service or have it happen remotely. So all that aside, now that we know how to remote wipe a computer, or essentially do that erase all content and settings and get it back to an OS, we're going to focus on that erase install and install package one last time, because we're going to talk about how to then pre-vision that computer. So we got it set up to at least hand to an end user so they can set it up almost like a DEP, but not actually a DEP, full DEP enrollment. So instead, we're going to talk about having a computer that we're going to re-provision, or a brand new computer out of the box, set it aside, could be either connected to the internet or not connected to the internet, as long as it has an account on it at some point, and we can trigger this same command from Jamf and have it provision the computer in addition. So the end goal is we want that desired computer sitting there, that when I come back to it and say a half hour, 45 minutes, it not only has the local admin account, it has the entirety of my provisioning or thin image deployment. So how many in the room are still using NetBoot or NetRestore? Even less than the people that do this already. That's awesome. Good. That kind of workflow can still be, you can simulate that with thin imaging, thin provisioning, by plugging in a machine to any kind of network and using a tiered system of policies. You can have those policies execute just as you would build out that big, large, monolithic image. Break those out into individual policies and have them execute in the order that you want. to kind of create that build automatically once the computer enrolls. So again, we want to repurpose that machine, give it to a new computer, but we don't actually want to physically touch that computer. So to set that up in Jamf, we have that custom quick add that Dan talked about earlier with all those special kind of features that have, excuse me, that have the Wi-Fi in there, that user account and whatnot. We need to create those smart groups. Some policies with custom triggers, if you're not familiar with custom triggers are, we'll walk through those. And then the actual provisioning thing at the end, the actual provision action. Pardon. That custom quick add, we do need some sort of network. So either you have the network going to be happening on Wi-Fi, so if it's just a computer set up with a power sitting somewhere in some little IT room, little lab over there that you're not actually anywhere close to, or if you have, say, a remote office where there's no real IT person there, have the HR person, whoever is the person that usually takes the hardware back from the employee if they're leaving that they need to re-provision, just set that up, turn it on, and plug it into some sort of power so at least it turns on. Or you can just have it plugged right into Ethernet. That's completely fine too. That quick add that Dan talked about, it's going to have that temporary admin account because we do want the computer to have some sort of admin account that we can either SSH into if something either goes wrong or the power dies or something along those lines. You boot it back up, we can at least get back into it. So that remote employee who's in SF or London can just get the computer back to working as quickly as possible. We want to set up all those setup screens, so all the startup assistant or setup assistant. We want to not see the iCloud, the Apple ID, the Siri stuff, because we want the computer to be completely usable the moment it's done. And then these last two are actually going to tell us that after that computer submits inventory, that computer's done imaging or done provisioning. Because once you have the computer out there in the wild, you just re-provisioned it, you're across the water, across the pond, I guess is the term, and you're just sitting there wondering if that computer was actually provisioned or not. The only way we're going to know that is if we drop some sort of file on there that tells us that dummy plist or that computer has actually been provisioned. Now that dummy plist could be really anything. It could be just a little file in a folder. That's fine. Whoops, back one. Go. Yeah. So it could be a little text file inside of a folder. And then you would have an extension attribute actually looking for that file. If that file exists, it makes you have a smart group looking to see if that file exists. That means that is imaged or provisioned. That also helps you down the road with the same policies that you're going to be using for this provisioning for your ad hoc deployments, either self-service or just automated enrollment or automated pushing out of those policies, because you don't want to necessarily install something on top of a computer that already has that application installed, especially if there's some sort of custom settings in there, because that could completely wipe out your finance person's 13 years of Chrome bookmarks and they just all go away because they never logged into the Google to actually sync that. So once you have your provisioning ready smart group, we also need to have a bunch of policies, and these policies are going to be the ones that are going to actually do the install of every single one of those applications to the computer. That's going to be your Chromes, your communication tools, your settings, your hardening security settings, anything like that. And the way that you trigger those, we're going to have some sort of script that calls each one, and the actual trigger is that last checkbox that many people do not either click or don't really know what it does, and those that do utilize it to its fullest. So a custom trigger, we're looking for just some sort of string or some sort of word that we can define as this policy. So what we can do is we can use the Jamf binary to invoke or call that policy using that custom trigger. So a custom trigger like this, provision Slack, it's pretty self-explanatory. At provisioning, we're going to deploy Slack. So we have our Jamf binary policy, it's Jamf policy. If we did just Jamf policy, what's going to happen? It's the recurring check-in, it'll get whatever policies it needs. That dash trigger flag and the provision Slack, we're going to have into whatever apps or settings we're looking to deploy. One line per app, one policy per app or deployment. So the structure you can have something a little like this. So you have every single one of your apps, including your OS, is all going to be set to ongoing, including those custom triggers. So your Evernotes, your Google Chromes, your Firefoxes, whatever it is you're looking to actually deploy, it's going to have an individual one. And you see in the third column in, every single policy has its own custom trigger. You absolutely could do one custom trigger for every single one and just call it like provision or setup or provisioning setup thing. But you'd have to also add more criteria to your smart groups as to who it's scoped to. If down the road you want to have a different provisioning for, say, the finance team, which is different than the engineering team, which is different than the art team, which is different than whoever it is that you have in your either school or enterprise. You want to make sure that everyone's getting what they need and only what they need, so you don't have to go back in and clean up everything. So once you have every single one of your policies, which is every single one of your apps broken down to an individual policy, your quote-unquote script is going to look a little bit like this. Security settings, we got our browsers on there, we got some Spotify going on there. This can be combined into a script in Jamf, just put in your little shebang at the top, and add each one of the lines, and this is now your build. This is your build. Ta-da. So once you have this build, you can either use this as your base build, or you can customize this even further, looking for either AD attributes as to who signed in on the machine. So if they're in finance, they get a special version of Excel. Or if they're if they're a creative, they get the Creative Cloud, which is not included in this. This is just the base one. There's many different ways you can have this trigger, and you want to have it specialized or individual per the user that's getting it. But if we're just doing it from afar, we just want to get it usable. We can put all those other Microsoft Office, the Adobe Suite, the Final Cuts, or whatever they're using inside of self-service for that end user, but we want to at least get the computer back to working, because again, we're doing this all completely and utterly remotely. Once we have our smart groups and we have our policy set up, we need to do a little bit of cleanup on the client machine, because we want to get that computer so at least it's working. So that would include removing that dummy plist, so we know that the plist is, or marking something in the plist that shows that it's provisioned, but it's not new to needing provision. We're going to apply any additional security configuration profiles, because you can't really tell it when to get the configuration profile. It's just going to happen via MDM. We're going to make sure that it has file vault, so whether that's next login for the end user, probably going to be either login or next logout. We're going to have it reboot back to setup assistant if and only if the person's going to be handed the computer as almost like a DEP type scenario. We're going to reboot that machine if they have file vault, have some sort of pop-up letting the end user know, the person who actually imaged it, know that the computer's ready. And then we have a smart group looking for completed machines that once it is provisioned, you don't necessarily want to scope provisioning things to that computer anymore. So let's do it. This is kind of a recap. We need at least 10.13.4 on a machine. Again, APFS. The create provisioning policy structure is found here. If you're new to provisioning, new to imaging in general, Jamf put out a three-part blog post called "Imaging is Dead, Now What?" Some guy wrote. He's really cool. He generally wears like a blue like kind of checked shirt like this, and jeans, and an Apple Watch. I wrote that.
Such poor humor.
What was that?
Such poor humor.
So mean to me.
Plugging yourself.
Definitely go ahead and read that, especially as to this whole concept of this talk is to ease or make it as easy as it is to adjust to new Apple technology. Apple puts out all these new features, all these new OSs, all these new security things, and there's just so much that we potentially have to test and investigate and all these things. On top of that, they completely got rid of the way to carbon copy, quote unquote, your imaging. So we have to break that down into provisioning steps. If you follow either the Jamf blog about how to switch over from provisioning to imaging, imaging to provisioning, that'll help you not just with your thin provisioning and your erasing and installing and getting it provisioned. It's also going to help your self-service and your ad hoc deployments as well. So back to the erase and install, the workflow. We're going to create a custom quick add package that gets the computer ready and enrolls it once we do erase and install it. We're going to cache that macOS installer on that machine, so whether it is going to be the end user is going to go into self-service and initiate that install themselves, or you're going to provision it from afar or erase and install it, we need it on the machine at some point. We had that start OS install binary script already sitting in as a policy in Jamf, and that's going to be the actual initiator of the doing of the upgrade or doing of the erase and install if necessary. Our smart groups and static groups, and if we are doing some sort of provisioning at the end, those policy structures. And then the result, the desired machines are completely wiped clean. We're not just creating a new user and handing it off. Completely wiped clean, clean OS, as upgraded as you'd like, and either provisioned, ready to go, back to the setup assistant where they can create a brand new local account, or just completely and utterly wiped. And then you can just put it on your shelf ready for the next deployment. Any questions? And there are 2 mics up here, so if you either want to step on up and form a line to the microphones, please do so. And these questions could be either for myself or Mr. Mintz.
I have a question about the script.
Yeah.
I'm currently using that in my environment, and is there any kind of support if there's issues with that? I'm finding that sometimes it'll say that it's complete, it'll run through it, it'll restart, but it won't install anything.
So in terms of support, everything that you see there from Jamf Helper to the script about the erase and install, yeah, we would cover that. Jamf Helper is in the product. The script, has been used with other customers. You'll see it has that EULA at the top of the script. So yeah, I don't see why not.
And this is in regards to the one on the GitHub.
Yeah,
Okay, cool. Thanks.
cool.
Yeah, we'll just go back and forth.
Supporter about to kill me for saying that, but hey.
So my question is, I'm interested in trying to have a complete zero-touch deployment. I have a ticket in with Jamf right now in regards to this exact situation, and what I've done so far is I've been able to deploy the Mojave installer locally on the machine, and then using your script, we're calling on that to install it. But the problem is that these are I'm staging machines. I have non-engineer type people working on these machines. They're not going to be putting any Apple IDs. These are not managed devices, so I think maybe your application that you just showed in your script may be helpful. But I don't want to have any interaction. I want the machines to upgrade to Mojave and have no user interaction whatsoever.
Sure.
This is possible.
Yeah, in our testing, we found with the same script that once you do push down the OS, you tell it to do the erase and install, you can customize that quick. We need it enrolled. We do need it enrolled at some point. You can unenroll it after the fact if you're not going to manage it. But once you get it enrolled, you can do the whole setup process where it bypasses all those screens, gets to a login window, and then you just type in whatever password that you had, either a temporary password, obviously not the local admin password, but the temporary password if it's going to be a standard user, and then you can log right in. We saw that both in High Sierra and Mojave.
Great. Thank you.
Definitely possible, yeah.
So in our environment, we still have a need to be on 1013 for various reasons. The problem is that we've also been starting to receive various Macs with the T2 security chip. So that workflow works great, except for boxes that have the T2 security chip, because it requires a special build of 1013 that's only available through Internet Recovery. So my question is, do you have a workflow with that can be integrated into the new Macs with the T2 security chip?
Good question. So it's a specific build that you have the build number for.
Correct, because I was trying to.
Look for install Mac OS PY.
Yep.
Look for that. You can get that version of installer downloaded, and then you can push it to those machines.
So,
Yes. So the script he was mentioning, the machine will actually reach out to Apple to grab the OS build it needs. So there's a script out there. It's like he said, there's a Python and a shell version, and it actually reaches out to the Apple servers to find whatever its latest available builds are. You just have to make sure that you know what build it should get, because there is, I think, a beta build in there. You can just choose whichever build that it needs, whether it's the Mojave or the 1013.
Yeah. And I believe within that script you can also specify the build number that you want for it to download. The reason that I necessarily didn't mention that within the example is that it could then potentially take that erase and install process and turn it into, I don't know, depending on internet bandwidth, an hour plus process just to get the installer. But I don't suppose there's anything stopping you from letting that script download the installer
In the background.
and capturing it, taking it offline, packaging it up, and then you've got a copy of it.
So I've already tried that, and it doesn't download the entire installer. It just basically downloads it doesn't download the head end of it with the binaries included.
Okay.
So.
Interesting.
I can say something on that. I've actually captured the full installer of T2 on my Mac bus just by trying it with Greg Nichols. Install Mac OS .py script. Just because I'm an archivist, I like to keep the various builds for the machines. I actually
Yeah, that'd be great. Perfect.
Yeah, so
Thank
it
you.
sounds like it is possible. We just have to use either that script or something to access the server to get
Thank
it.
you.
Cool.
Thank you.
So our current setup at our university, is whenever clients are purchasing Macs, they send us a serial number, we throw it in Apple School Manager, and it gets the faculty staff pre-stage. Problem is, computing consultants and the users are not properly scoping the devices. So I like the little dialog box that you guys had pop up there asking for their name and department and everything like that. So my question for you, since I never seen that before, the user inputs that information in there and then it modifies the record in Jamf. So essentially, the technician doesn't have to go into Jamf and manually scope that computer out. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Correct, yeah,
Okay.
that pop-up, all the fields are gonna add to a plist and runs recon at the end to fill in extension attributes. And then based on what extension attributes it gets, there's a little start, actually the restore, or start doing the erase and install, and then it triggers on down based on whatever settings you chose.
Great, great. I think that's really going to help us. Thank you.
Sure.
Hello.
Hey.
Great workflow for both sides. I'm not going to mention which one I like better.
You can do.
You can.
Pretty much, main question is the difference between the both workflows is the Pasho app, right? Pretty much does all of the scripting part, right? So you just fill out, whatever you need to fill out, and I mean, is
Yeah,
that the
and that's the main difference. The Pasho app is getting the inventory up to date so that it will receive the correct configuration. So there may be, like Jonathan had a load of policies with custom triggers. It's making sure that it gets into the right one, basically.
Pasho app is free, right?
Pasho is a free framework that you can use in any way. Yeah.
Awesome. And as far as binding them to Active Directory goes, would you recommend that doing like just totally after the imaging part, make a policy, or is there some way you can integrate that within the erase install process?
So if you need to bind, best practice I think I've seen is to bind before you file vault. So in your provisioning, make sure you have the bind in there so it adapts the passwords, so the passwords start going there. Like if you're doing DEP, the passwords will go, but if you bind after the fact and you're not using DEP, get the bind in there. Once everything else is installed, then do file vault, but definitely do it before it's done provisioning.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Cool.
Any way to do the wireless if you have 802.1x and you can't just do like a username and a password?
Have not tried that. So
No.
this particular one is using just that network setup command for just like an open network, because a lot of organizations, especially those that are doing the Mac choice, they never really opened up firewall properly for Apple. So they have some sort of guest network. It's definitely something to investigate. I don't know if anyone else knows if you can programmatically set up a cert based.
I suppose you could have it connect by config profile that was also in some way wrapped up in that quick add package. So you went ahead and installed the config
Oh,
profile
sure.
first, using profiles
Wow,
command.
okay, yeah.
You definitely would then have to have like a generic account that did the authentication. But yeah, and then you could go ahead again at the end and use the profiles command to remove it.
It's like a service account attached to a policy deployed almost, but bundle it up inside of a package in Composer. Thanks. Yeah.
So we're in a situation, I'm from Notre Dame. We have faculty who, when they get new machines, we're fine because those are all in DEP now. But we're on like a 4-year rotation, so we've got a bunch of old machines out there that aren't DEP'd. So when we have students do the rebuilds on those machines when there's a problem, we're finding that somebody has to accept the DEP profile to get it to be fully active.
So for user-initiated MDM,
Right. Well, so we're building it, and we're trying not to have the students have to do any
Sure.
clicking around. But then that profile's not getting, when we do the thin build,
right.
it isn't accepted, so it's not fully active. We don't want to tell the faculty, well, you have to go in here, and you have to go in here, you have to do this. Is there a way around that?
Correct me if I'm wrong, unfortunately not.
It's called
No.
user-approved MDM.
Right, so
Yeah. Yep.
because of the user-approved MDM, that only falls into the quick add. So if you are enrolling via quick add, you're gonna have to go in there, some sort of admin's gonna have to go in there, click it.
And do it, and that's what we're doing. We're doing
Yes,
quick add.
the other option is to do it via user-initiated enrollment, and that way you do not have to do that. But if you just give your IT, the people that are doing the imaging accounts just to enroll,
Just to do that.
they won't have to do that.
Okay. And I understand some vendors will add serial numbers so they look like they're DEP programs, but some won't, and that's kind of a nebulous area. Do you guys?
That's something I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay.
your vendor has to give your DEP devices to you, and then you assign them through Business Manager to your.
Are you saying to add them to DEP, or they're spoofing to make it appear that they're DEP'd?
You can't, I mean, it either comes from your vendor and they assign it to your DEP or not. I mean, that's all.
Right, the new machines are all assigned to DEP, but there's no way to make the old machines.
No.
Well,
So the old machines, you can go back to the vendor, and if they're an Apple reseller, they can add them back. You can go back, I think, like 4 or 5 years.
And that's kind of like at their discretion. All of our stuff goes through a bookstore, so it's Follett.
Gotcha.
I would imagine it's not at their discretion. They should definitely do it for you. It's
They
not
should
that,
do-
it's not that they say, well, I don't really want to. They should.
Okay.
And I presume that if you're buying enough hardware off them and you dangle the carrot of, hey, I might not choose to buy any new hardware if you don't give me my old ones.
Okay, thank you.
Some of them that don't sell your hardware anymore will decide not to. We've had that happen.
It's always worth applying a bit of pressure.
I haven't looked into the erase install flag, but is there any way to specify for InfoSec purposes what kind of erase it does?
Haven't checked it out.
Haven't looked into it. I know it's,
There's some APFS magic in there.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Paul. I have a quick question. I'm pretty new to Jamf. What I'm curious about, and I didn't hear it discussed here, with SCCM, they have a user state migration tool built into the SCCM. And you can use that to capture the user's profile and then restore it to the re-image machine. Excuse me. I'm curious what you would recommend to capture a user's profile and restore it. I have used rsync with a exclude from, and that works quite well. But I'd like to have something that's a little more automated.
I think the only recommended way is to use like a Druva or like a crash plan type. It would have to be like a third party, almost like a backup solution to do the restore after. If you're doing like an rsync, you have to be careful that the next OS or whatever OS you're going to next is going to be able to, compatibility-wise, work. There's nothing in Jamf to do backups. There's no data kind of migration type things like that. So if you're backing up, back up to some sort of external something, not even locally, completely external, and then get back just the data that's in the hard folders themselves, nothing hidden. That's going to be your best bet.
Okay, thank you.
All right, folks. So that we are at 3:30. So this session is coming. Oh, one more.
Time for one?
Not to be a pain. Last question. So basically, I don't know if you guys have seen this issue, but upgrading from just Sierra to High Sierra with that same script, some of my machines didn't change to APFS. They just stayed as the old.
So what were they? Were they solid state or regular hard drive?
They're at the regular, yeah.
So if they're regular hard drive, they're going to stay.
They're going to stay.
They're not going to.
And is there any reason why not to switch them to APFS? I mean, it's not going to work well, right? Or
It's
efficient.
the default option. I guess you could, but generally, if it's a Fusion drive or if it's a regular hard drive, it is going to by default stay. There's some good resources you can read into on the use of the upgrade, and there is an extra flag that you can put in there that will go ahead and force it to APFS or preserve it. And I actually have on my laptop, if you want to just pop to the front afterwards, I got another presentation from a previous event where I've got those flags listed out. So come and have a chat afterwards, I'll show you.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.